Hey, welcome into Strictly Speaking. Today we're talking with Jim Renacci. He is a former four-term congressman from the great state of Ohio. He is an author. He is a former Senate candidate, a former gubernatorial candidate, still very, very active in Ohio politics. But we're not just talking politics today. We're talking about all things America, how we're going to save this country, what we're going to do about all of the divisions and the afflictions that we're all suffering through right now. But Jim Renacci may have the answers. Stay here on Strictly Speaking. Jim, so good to have you in, man. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Isn't it funny? I just realized when I introduced you, because this is a national podcast, so it's not just limited to Ohio. Normally, when you and I talk, it's on local radio
Sure.
in Cleveland. Isn't it funny how every elected official who has ever served, who has ever been introduced by every media member ever, is introduced as the great state of? Nobody has ever said, here's a guy from the crappy state of California. Man, things are a mess there. It's always the great state of something. Is every state great?
Yeah, well, every state thinks they're great. I think some are better than others, that's for sure.
I mean, seriously, I would just love truth in broadcasting once in a while. And I'm in broadcasting, so I'll throw stones at myself too. And I just did it. I introduced you. I wasn't planned. That was an off-the-cuff introduction. I've known you for years. But I automatically went to the great state of. And it's like kind of funny because not every state is great. A lot of states are better than others, and a lot of them are an absolute, what Donald Trump once called shithole countries. You know, there are some shithole states right now because of some of what's going on. Am I wrong?
Oh, no, you're right. But the interesting thing is people that live there will still say it's great, even though when you compare them, and that's the real key, you just got to compare them. And when you compare them, you'll see that some are very much worse than others.
But you know what? I think those people are liars. You know what I mean? And here's why. Because many of them, they're leaving their great state of because it's so high tax and it's so high crime and it's so, you know what I mean? And then on the way out, they're trying to turn the new state that they moved to like the old one that they did. You know, they're fleeing California, they're fleeing New York, they're fleeing Colorado, they're coming to Texas and Tennessee and Florida, and they're saying, you know, they want to come here and vote the same way,
Absolutely,
of the state
yeah.
that they just fled. If it was so great, why'd you leave?
That's exactly right. Well, that's the one good thing about our country. We have 50 states. You can decide where you go. But most people are fleeing to those states you're talking about. Tennessee, Florida. Florida's getting an overwhelming number of people because no tax, great weather. But really, the economic conditions in Florida are so much better than some other states. It's so much better to go there. But really, it's because of the tax situation. Like my son, who's a doctor in New York now, he's serving out probably 3 more years there. He said when he decides where he's going to go, it's probably going to be Texas, Florida, Tennessee. And why is he picking those states? No taxes.
Yeah, well, those are good reasons. It's more than, I think that's a huge part of it. Don't get me wrong. I think it's more than that too, though. You know, they may never want to disavow their party or their ideology, but they recognize the way things are being run. You know, for example, with crime. And some of the states that we're talking about that are losing, there's hemorrhaging residents. You know, they've got some of the most, you know, lax prosecutions, and they've got, you know, a policy of you know, judges, you know, left-wing appointed or elected judges and nominated judges and so forth, who are just, people are sick of crime. They're sick of the way their conditions is. You know, they're sick of homeless people and excrement and drug needles all over their streets, and they're just like, I want to get away from this stuff, man. You know, I mean, I get taxes, but I think there's a way of life thing too people are changing on.
Yeah, well, that's true too. And I think when you look at the best states, many of them have a better way of life, and I think that's a key.
What about ours? Where's Ohio fall in all of that? Are we a great state of Ohio, like we like to say, and like I just introduced you?
Well, look, I ran for governor because I think Ohio is lacking in so many ways, but I look at it from a statistical standpoint. We're one of the highest tax states. We're one of the highest spending states. We also have 5 of the worst cities in the country, and I'm talking about crime-wise.
Yeah.
So you go down this list. Education, we're ranked in the lowest of the 50. So, I mean, all of these things are reasons why people are leaving. And what's so interesting about Ohio that, you know, we have so many people that say, oh, I love Ohio too, and I'm still here. I'm still fighting for it to change it. But the biggest problem with Ohio is people look at this state and they say, wait a minute, I can go elsewhere for a better job, a better climate, a better situation, safer streets. So are we really the great state of Ohio? I think we can be. And I think we got so many opportunities with a lake to the north and a river to the south, and the parks we have. Ohio should be one of the greatest states, but ranking wise, anywhere from 39th to 50th in most rankings.
So what you just did, anybody who's a critic of yours or basically any Democrat, you just indicted the Republican Party, because this is a Republican dominated state. Every state office is held by a Republican, supermajority in the General Assembly. So if the state is run by Republicans, but it's 39th to 50th and having all of these bad things, they're saying, man, you Republicans are doing a crappy job.
Well, and Democrats were too, because it didn't happen overnight. And, this has happened over the last 25 years, and Democrats had control too. The key is Republicans and Democrats in this state don't want to change it. They want it to stay as it is. But I had an interesting discussion with a high-ranking Republican probably 2 weeks ago, and he said, Renacci, one of the things you don't understand about Ohio, really not a Republican state. And I say that as well, because we only have maybe 15% Republican, 15% Democrat, and 70% independent. But he said to me, we are a moderate state, and we elect moderate Republicans. We don't elect conservatives. And if you look across the board, even though we are a state that Republicans dominate, that they have figured out a way to get elected by being a moderate to left-leaning center Republican. And we still elect them. And that's why I fight for closed primaries. That's why I'm fighting for all the things. In fact, this same individual said to me, the reason you'll never get closed primaries put in place in Ohio is because that moderate Republican wants, we would have conservative Republicans in office if we had a closed primary instead of a moderate set of Republicans, which is what we have.
You're right. I think there are far more moderate Republicans than conservative Republicans in the state. But what's interesting is the left doesn't seem to be, in other words, those moderate but to left-leaning individuals aren't good enough for the left, because they want this issue 1 in the state of Ohio. For those who don't know, issue 1 in the state of Ohio, which is on the ballot in November, it's a ballot initiative to take politicians out of the district map drawing and to let a civilian-led unelected commission draw the maps so that they could turn more of the red areas blue. So, they're going radical here. I mean, even though it's not a real conservative state, it's not enough Democrat power for them to the point where they want to actually just, kick the elected officers or officials, I should say, out of the district drawing process.
Well, I would agree. And actually, they want to set up another bureaucracy, which is even worse, an expensive bureaucracy. Ohio already spends almost as much as Florida, and Florida's twice our size when you come to government spending. And we're going to set up another bureaucracy. So when I talk about issue 1, I say, if people don't like government, which I think 90% of people don't, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, you really don't like government taking your money and taxing you. Why would you support another bureaucracy, which is going to cost you more money and you have less control of? So, yeah, I agree with you.
Do the Democrats still not like taxes? It's funny you say that, because it would seem to be common sense. Nobody likes to take their money and give it to somebody else, particularly a bureaucracy or a massive government. But the reality is, every Democrat that comes down the line, I know it's an old canard to say tax and spend Democrats, but they are. They want to collect more from the populace. I mean, for crying out loud now, they got there's a nominee who wants to tax money that hasn't even been earned yet. The unrealized capital gains tax is 25% of whatever's in your IRA or in your 401k or properties or whatever that you own. Even if you haven't sold them, you got to pay taxes on those. So, I mean, do they really not like taxes? They seem to be pretty in love with it.
Well, it's interesting. So I sat on the Ways and Means Committee when I was in Washington. We looked at the tax code. And I said this the other day, there were Republicans sitting in that room that wanted to tax unrealized gains too. So again, that is a thought process that's just scary.
How do they justify it? Because I've listened, and I'm trying to, even though I'm a particular, spot on the right side of the ideological scale, I want to understand the other side, more or less, so I can challenge it or debate it or whatever. I got to learn it, and I'm trying to see what their point. I can't find anything.
Well, it would be a disaster, because here's what happens.
That's what I keep coming up with.
You tax the unrealized gain. Well, what happens when that unrealized gain becomes less than it was? So you'd be moving the needle all the time. You just can't do it. But I tell you, their reason for it is they said, well, people put that on their financial statement. It says what they're worth, but they haven't paid taxes on it. I used to tell people when I was a CPA, because it's one of the things, I was in business for 30 years, I was a CPA, they'd have these financial statements that would show they were worth X amount of dollars. And I used to say, you know what, you can put that on there now, but you're never really worth that much, because for you to get those dollars, you're going to have to cash out and pay taxes,
That's right.
and usually less. So that's the
That's
theory
a great point
behind it.
Well, but again, even that doesn't make any sense, because if it went that way by simple common sense, if my assets have appreciated to the point where I have to pay taxes on them, what if my 401k has taken a dive? What if we've had do I get to write those losses off on my taxes?
Well, that's the side of it. When you look at it from a tax standpoint, you can't, and that's what we did in the Ways and Means Committee. We talked about those things. Even think about this. I mean, all of that stuff was talked about in Ways and Means. We talked about the unearned earnings in a life insurance policy. And I said, wait a minute. Think about what you do there. You kill the insurance business, because one of the things people buy life insurance is because of the non-taxing effect when it cashes out. So if you're going to tax all those things, the life insurance industry goes away. But taxes drive things. I used to say this. It's almost like the former President Trump has come out and said, we're going to eliminate tax on tips. I mean, between you and me, that is a ridiculous thing to talk about. I'll tell you why. Let's say you're a house painter and you're going to come paint my house. And you say to me, hey, Renacci, I'll paint your house for $3,000. And I'll say to you, well, how about if I pay you just a tip? How about if I just tip you $2,500? Well, you're going to say, well, I'll take that. See, you better be careful, because people will drive their whole business process toward taxation. When you talk about we're not, and President Trump just came out with this one, we're not going to tax overtime. Think about that. So now you have a guy or gal making a lot of money because they're working overtime, and they like that.
Most of our first responders, they make a big, cops and firefighters, they make big bucks working overtime. They get their regular salary, but they put in a lot of overtime, and that's where they make their hay.
So you got all this overtime. So now what's going to happen is people are going to say, we're going to eliminate people wanting to come to work, because we're going to want people, workers going to want to make the overtime. So you've got to watch what you do. Taxation drives policy, drives direction. And I learned that in a Ways and Means Committee. I mean, why has the tax code become so complicated? Because we drive policy with tax code. So not taxing overtime will change everybody's perspective in the world as to how they run their business.
So it's the third time you've brought up Ways and Means Committee. It sounds like you miss Washington.
No, I don't miss Washington.
I asked you on the radio show when you left why, and you decided not to run again after 4 terms, and you said you were just sick and tired of the swamp or something to that effect. I mean, but do you not miss it at all?
No, and I think about people that are there today. Look, I wrote a book, and I said anybody there after 8 years is part of the problem today.
What's the book called?
The GOP's lost decade.
Dylan, fire that bad boy up, would you? Throw it up on the screen for everybody to see. But
I talk about those things because if you think about it, you leave your home on a Monday, you're gone all week, you come back on a Friday, and then you look at yourself and say, what did I accomplish? And it's nothing. And then you do it again the next week, and then you do it again the next week, and then you do it again.
Did you really feel like that while you were doing it? Like, I didn't accomplish anything? You were there for 8 years.
Yeah, and what happens is you're running around, you're doing meetings after meetings, but think about, what did we really accomplish? I think my biggest fear for our country is the national debt. And I went there because of the national debt, which at that time was less than 10 trillion, and today it's 33 trillion.
35 now.
Right, 35.
I think.
Yeah,
I think the last I saw, it's going up by $1 trillion every 100 days, I think is the...
Right. And the problem is that was the whole purpose of the Tea Party. That was the whole purpose of Jim Renacci going. We had to stop this, and now we don't even talk about it. So we are on this, and if you look at the current 2 candidates running for president and both of their policies, there's an organization, Committee for Responsible Government in Washington. It's nonpartisan. I was one of their they used to call me one of their greatest assets in Washington, because I would say, we can't keep this going. But both presidential candidates who are running, when they scale their policies, we're going to go from 35 trillion to 60 trillion in the next 4 years. So, but nobody's talking about it.
No, well, how can you? What can you say about it? I mean, everybody I talk to about it, people like you who either in office or were in office, we talk about how to deal with that. I just think the scope of it is so enormous, we can't really wrap our brains around it. We see a number and $35 trillion. The trillion part, we can't even really wrap our brains around. And so we're just kind of like, I feel like everybody I've ever talked to has said, we're never going to pay it off. There's never going to be a way to pay it off. We are going to continue to accrue interest that's going to kill us and bankrupt us as we continue to make those interest payments, but that's never going to get paid off. And I hear people say, the hell with it. Why don't you just tell every creditor around the world, you know what, you've gotten all you're going to get from us. We're wiping the slate clean here. Because how does that ever happen, Jim? In my children's lifetimes, $35 trillion isn't going to get paid off, much less the 60 that's coming in 4 years.
Problem is that everybody's Social Security trust fund is banked on that, because what we've done is we've borrowed, Social Security is investing in that debt. So the largest creditor is the American people. So if you cash in and say, get rid of that, see, that's what people don't understand. It's a big number. And yes, some of it's owned by Russia and China and all these other countries, but it's a small amount compared to the big number, and the big number is owned by us. So, our Social Security trust fund it's one of the problems with the Social Security trust fund. People say, well, I paid into that Social Security trust fund and I should get it back. I said, yeah, you should. The problem is you've invested it in Treasury bills, which are part of the national debt. The Treasury bills are paying back to the trust fund, think about COVID time, 0.01%, and inflation's at 5 or 6%. So your Social Security fund will never catch up, which I know there are people that didn't like when George Bush said we should invest in
Privatize
it. But if you think about it, if we would have invested back in George Bush's days at 8 or 9%, the Social Security fund would be massive right now. But instead, we've invested in Treasury bills, which is our Social Security, which is our national debt.
Why was there such a pushback against that? Because I remember at the time being supportive of at least exploring this. They dismissed it out of hand. They just called him a nut, an idiot, or whatever. But I remember thinking about it based on what the projections were. Like you said, if you go into T-bills versus privatizing it, it's going to be insolvent by whatever, 2030 something, I think they said at the time. And I wondered why everybody just said, no, we can't do that. And you're looking at it now with hindsight saying, yeah, we should have done that.
Well, we should have done it, but you're right. People said it was safer in Treasury bills because they're backed by the United States government. Well, sure, it's safer in Treasury bills, but you don't get the return.
Right.
But those are the kind of things that drove me crazy by being in Washington, because I'm a business guy at heart. I spent almost 30 years in business before I went to Washington. So I understand, you asked me why. Well, I would start my business day usually I was doing it 7 days a week, but let's assume my Monday morning, open up the office. By the end of the day on Friday, my staff and I had accomplished enormous things. So you're happy to call the weekend and say, we've accomplished a lot this week, let's come back next week. When I flew home in a plane from Washington, I'd say, we haven't accomplished anything. We haven't stopped the national debt. We haven't fixed illegal immigration. I think you and I talked about this on a radio show, because illegal immigration is another a problem in our country. Well, we had two bills when I was in Congress. One was a moderate bill, one was a conservative bill. I'll never forget this. And you might even ask me on the radio show. I voted for both of them. And what happened was the moderates didn't vote for the conservative version, the conservatives didn't vote for the moderate version, nothing passed, and we got nothing fixed. And somebody asked me, well, why'd you vote for both of them? I said, because we have to do something. And if we can't pass either of these things, then we're still going to have illegal immigration. And look, 8 years later, we still have illegal immigration. We haven't fixed it.
So what that sounds like to me is the current debate about, immigration as we get ready for this election. And, the Harris and Walz team, say, there was a bipartisan bill that was passed to, immigration reform, and we could have done this. It was the strongest bill in the last 40 years, and Trump killed it by telling, the current members of Congress to not fix it, because then he wouldn't have a campaign issue to run on. And, is that what you mean when you say a moderate bill? Because I look at that bill and I would have been very angry if anybody voted for it. If you voted for it, I probably would have called you on the radio and said, what the hell are you doing? I get it. You have to do something, but sometimes it's better to do nothing than something worse. And I think that would have made things worse.
Well, see, the difference is if you want to get to 10, sometimes you got to get to 3 and 4 and 5 before you get to 10. So even though you and I would like to get to 10, and I'd love a bill that got us to 10, I'd kind of like us to get to 2 and 3 and then 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, because I think you got to incrementally get there, and that's the problem in Washington. If you want everything, you get nothing. And look, I'm as conservative as you can get, but there were many times, like I never voted for a CR. And I don't know if your listeners know what a CR, but it's a continuing resolution. It's an open checkbook. All you're doing is giving the president the okay to keep spending money.
Exactly at the rate they're at now.
Right. Never voted for it. And then one day, while President Trump was in office, there was a CR up. I got told that the president wants to talk to me in the cloakroom, which is the back of the chamber. And I walked back there, and the president says, "Hey, Renacci, I need you to vote. Mr. President Trump, I need you to vote for a CR." I go, "Mr. President, I don't vote for CRs." He goes, "I know you don't, but I need you to do it for me." I go, "I don't vote for CRs." And he said, "I need your vote." And it was a 2-week CR. I'll never forget this. I said, "Listen, I'm going to do this for you, but don't come back to me in 2 weeks, because this is only a 2-week CR." So I voted for it, and then I'll never forget, 2 weeks later, we had to do another CR.
Here we go again.
And they're waving me back. The president wants to talk in a cloakroom. I'm not doing it. Because if we don't...
Did you go back, or did you just not even address it?
No, I addressed it. I told him I'm just not going to do it. I said, "I told you 2 weeks I'm not going to do it." But it was kind of comical, because even President Trump knew that CRs were bad, but he was supporting them because he had to.
Yeah.
And
well, you get in that space where if there's a shutdown, if the government is not funded and there's a shutdown, the blame game starts, and the left owns the blame game because they own the media, and so Trump is going to take the hit, and the Democrat leadership is going to take a hit, or the Republican leadership. I mean, same thing now. They're what is it, about a 3-month cycle now? Aren't they doing continuing 3-month cycles? Johnson, who largely replaced McCarthy because McCarthy was signing CRs or
Right.
agreeing to CRs. He was going to come in and put a stop to that. And I think we've run 3 in a row now.
No, he's stuck in the same boat, and that's the problem. And this is the problem at Washington.
So frustrating.
And by the way, I lived through a shutdown, and I would tell your listeners, we do not want to shut the government down. We get nowhere. We get nothing done. The only thing that shuts down are the parks.
Yep.
Everything else keeps going. People don't get paid, but their pay keeps accruing. So the military doesn't get paid, but their pay keeps accruing. It's the stupidest thing in the world. A true shutdown would mean everything shuts down. But if you think about how dangerous that would be, the military would shut down. You just can't do it. So the shutdowns are just gimmicks, ridiculous. What we really need to do is we need to pass appropriation bills and budgets. And if members...
Individual bills.
Right.
Not omnibus bills.
Right. Yeah, individual appropriation bills. And I think if you put a clause in there that if you pass a bill... By the way, I think I signed on this when I was in Congress. If you pass a bill that increases the debt, you're fired. Or if you pass a budget that's not balanced, you're fired. All right? But nobody else.
I would agree with that, but nobody wants to do that because it's political suicide.
But that's the only way to do it. And why is it political suicide? Because really the drivers of their debt, and most people don't want to hear this, but the drivers of the debt are Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest. That drives it. That alone is $4.2 trillion a year, and or $4.5 trillion a year, and we bring in $4.2 trillion a year. So just that there, and people say, Renacci, I paid into that. I want that money. Yeah, well, everybody wants it, but there are ways to fix it. Why does a billionaire get Social Security? That's what I used to.
Yeah,
I was on the Social Security subcommittee.
That's a great question.
And I remember getting kicked by a Republican when I said, billionaires and multimillionaires don't need Social Security. It's SSI. It's a supplemental insurance. Right. And my argument was, you buy insurance for your house and you never get any money back. You buy insurance for your car, you never get any money back. You buy insurance, supplemental security insurance, for those that need it. That what I call the safety net. And if you don't need it, you shouldn't get it back. But
Well, I look at it at the other end of the spectrum. You know, there's a poverty line. If you make less than whatever, you don't have to pay taxes. Well, if you make more than whatever, you don't get Social Security. I mean, you know, I mean, it's just fundamental fairness and it's common sense. You mentioned Medicare, though, so I have to ask you, what do you think of Medicare for all?
Well, look, I don't agree with Medicare for all. I think private insurance is important. I think competition is important. But I do think our current Medicare program is broken because the average couple pays in $134,000 in their lifetime and takes out $340,000. And see, when you say those numbers, you say, wow. Now, here's what's interesting. The only way you'll ever fix that, and nobody wants to talk about this either. Now you're starting to see why I left Washington, because the answer to that is we never want people to die, and nobody wants their family members to die. But ultimately, there comes a time where the expense is so high. I hate to say this, for the return. And when you talk about that in Washington, they want to crucify you. But look, I use my mom. God bless her. She passed away last year, and she wanted to live to be 100. She passed away at 96. But the last 6 months of her life, that Medicare probably paid a couple $100,000 for a couple months of life. And so you got to think about those things. Now, nobody wants to think about them. But
she made a hell of a run, by the way. She got to 96.
Got to 96.
Good on her.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
God bless her, and still miss her today. But did I want her to go? No. But then you start, and the only reason I know this, I'm an executor, and I see all these Medicare bills rolling in, and now I realize the issue there.
But I mean, what can you do differently? I mean, you're right. Nobody wants to talk about it, and nobody wants to say my mother, wife, whatever, grandmother doesn't deserve to live every last second that they have on this earth. And if the bills are what the bills are to help keep them alive, again, assuming, and again, who are we to determine what quote unquote quality of life is? But you know what I mean? I'm not talking about somebody who's in a vegetative or comatose state or something of that nature, but just if you're 96 and you still get a little bit of enjoyment leaning up in your bed a little bit and smiling when you walk into the room and stuff, who is to put a price tag on that?
But that's what you got to address. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just saying it has to be addressed.
No, that's a general thing. It's like when I say you, I don't mean you, I mean us. How do you make that determination as a country and as a population, and how much we're willing to spend on it?
That's the answer right there. How much are we willing to spend on the death of an elderly? And when you look into those things, nobody wants to talk about it. But that's what drives our Medicare costs up. So people look in business. If you're in business, I was in business for 30 years. If I had something I was bringing in 100 and spending 300, I probably got rid of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it, but you got rid of it. And I think the other way around it, because we did talk about this, because I was on the Medicare subcommittee too. I mean, I was on all these subcommittees, and we talked about it. And one of the ways you do it is that Medicare just doesn't pay for it. You opt into private. So if your mom is sick and she's in that last stages of her life, there comes a point where Medicare can't pay for it, but it becomes a private cost.
Right.
And I don't know. That's another thing we can look at. I mean,
yeah. It's a difficult thing to think about. Like I said, how much you're willing to pay for somebody else's life and quality thereof that only they know. Let's go back to D.C. And you told me why you got out, and you explained that feeling of at the end of the week or on the weekend, you're looking back and going, we didn't get squat done. We didn't do anything done about the most important things. All we did was pass another week, and then we're going to do it again. Do you look back ever and think, I did a lot? I'm proud as hell of that. I made that happen, or I contributed and played a big role in that. There's got to be some things you feel like.
And I'll tell you what it is.
Because otherwise we're kind of saying we shouldn't even have the government as it exists. We need to rewrite the whole thing. We need to reformat, scrap the system put together by the founders, and start it over again. There has to be something that's getting done. And tell me something that you were proud of.
So I would tell you that my proudest moments were what I did back in the district. You know, what I did for veterans. I still get veterans seeing me on the street crying and thanking me for what I did. All the nominations that I put through for individuals coming out of high school, going into the military academies. I still get parents hugging me in the airport, thanking me and telling me about their daughter or their son and what they've done. I think about some of the things I were able to do for people that had issues with taxation and all those. That was back home though, because I would tell you as a member of Congress, you made a phone call, or the person stuck in, I'll never forget, I had somebody stuck in Iraq, I believe, on a Saturday night at 1 a.m. I got a call and I was able to get them out. Those are the things that you look at.
A civilian?
Yeah, that got there and shouldn't have been there, and we're able to get them out. So those are the kind of things that I'm very proud of. The Tax Cut and Jobs bill, I'm very proud of, not because, let me just say, I was probably so I always chuckle when President Trump says, I passed, that he got the Tax Cut and Jobs bill done. I think back of the, probably 20 weeks that I spent 7 days a week in Washington with 40 people, of which maybe 38 of them didn't even know what the tax code was, trying to change the tax code, where I was just saying, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't tax this, you can't do that, it's going to cost people money. And so I'm proud of that, because I was able to stop a lot of things that did not get into the Tax Cut and Jobs bill that would have been detrimental. I give you an example. One of the things, the 401k, they wanted to end the tax savings in a 401k, and make it all deferred. And so what I did one day, I went back to my office. I showed what happens to the person with a 401k and what happens with one that doesn't have one tax deferred. I showed everybody the difference. I went back to the tax writing committee. I go, tell me why the American people shouldn't have that. I got it knocked off. So those are the kind of things, but that's because I took real life experience there, which most of the people in Congress don't have that real life experience. They've never balanced a checkbook. I hate to say that. They've never built a business. They've never been stuck with multiple mortgages and making payroll. I always chuckle. I used to use the catch line, I've signed more of the front of paychecks than the back of paychecks. And there weren't that many of us there. So I'm proud of being there for that. But after a while, you walk out there and say, well, what are we really getting done? Because we're not fixing the border crisis. We're not fixing the debt. I still say the debt will be our biggest problem. That is look, I just had some friends of mine come back from Greece. And I used to say, if we don't fix our debt, and I even brought the Comptroller General into a budget meeting. And because I told him I wanted him to come, he was a Democrat, appointed by Obama. But he told me, if we don't fix our debts and deficits, we'll be in a Greece-like situation in the next 20 years. And that was in 2012.
Wow.
So I brought him to the budget committee. He explains that. And somebody says, well, what's a Greece-like situation? Well, my friends who just came back from Greece said, Greece is in bad shape because their currency collapsed, their economy collapsed. They got to rely on everybody else now to take care of them. That's what will happen in the United States if our currency gets devalued, if our debt skyrockets like it's on. So we have to prepare for that.
Yeah, that's a pretty frightening thing. So it just dawned on me, not that we haven't had this conversation before in other forums about why you left DC and why you were frustrated with it, but yet you wanted to go back. 6 years ago in 2018, you ran for Senate. Why would you want to go back? I know it's a different chamber, but you'd be back in the same mess.
Well, truth was I didn't want to go back. Truth was I was running for governor, because I do believe that the best way to fix our country is to have strong governors who believe in the principles of our founders, and then make each state stronger and take away the power from the federal government. That's what I believe in.
But you got pulled away from that race.
Well, because I got a call from President Trump at that time asking me to get into the Senate race because Josh Mandel, the Senate candidate, stepped out. And everybody knew that I was probably on track to win in 2018 the governor's race. So they saw me as, well, if he can win the governor's race, he can win this Senate seat against Sherrod Brown. Let's get him in there. But then I saw what politics does, because once they got me in, they really didn't want me in the Senate race. They wanted me out of the governor's race. And I tell people that because I learned that after the fact.
So Trump wanted you out of the governor's race?
No, I think President Trump really didn't know. President Trump really wanted me in the Senate race because people were telling me, you got to get Renacci out of this governor's race, get him in the Senate race. He could be one of your greatest allies.
So they basically pulled the wool over his eyes and said, this is the best guy to get in because they wanted you out. Who wanted you out of the governor's race? Why?
Well, I think I call it the deep state. Those individuals that were here really wanted DeWine to win. And what's interesting, President Trump at that time came back in 2020 to Ohio, did a fundraiser here in Cleveland after I had lost, pulled me aside and said, I'll never forget this. And then he did it in public. He did it in front of, the 200 guests at this fundraiser. He said, Renacci, stand up. He said, the party screwed you over. You should have been the next U.S. Senator because nobody helped you.
They didn't fund you, did they?
They didn't fund me. They didn't help me. But I will also tell you, a lot of people aren't aware of this. I never forget, I got a call from Jared Kushner, which again was Trump's advisor, his son-in-law, and he said to me, he told me with about 2 months left that even Trump was being told, let's not fight for Renacci anymore. And he told me that. He goes, I got to apologize for you. I don't think we're going to be all in your Senate race. But I think at that time they were cutting other deals. And let's face it, Trump makes what I like about him and dislike about him is that he's a transactional guy. So he makes a lot of decisions based on transactions. So I believe there were some transactions going on. But in the end, look, I still believe I am put in positions to make a difference. And in the Senate, I would have never, I've had people tell me, you would have never been happy there. And it's probably right.
So it's probably a good thing that it worked out the way that it did.
Probably did. And
other than the fact that you could have been governor and on your second term right now and doing some good things for the state.
But I've fought for good things in the state, and I've got things change in the state. Constitutional carry, all of these bills. I look at many of the things that Governor DeWine was not supportive of. He became supportive of when he had competition, which is why I believe primaries are good. I believe we should always have good, solid primaries and good discussions, because it made Governor DeWine, whether it was the constitutional carry bill, other bills that he supported, it's because he had somebody running against him that was supporting those ideas too.
So let's talk about Trump. At the time of our conversation right now, they've tried to kill him twice. By the time this episode drops, maybe who knows what that number will be, 3, 4, I don't know, because I don't know if I see it ending. In fact, I saw a survey about an hour before I came to the studio to do this conversation, a Rasmussen survey that found 1,000 people were surveyed. I don't know how many of them were Democrats, but of the Democrats surveyed, 28% responded to the question of, would the United States have been better off if the assassination attempt had been successful? 28% of Democrats said yes. Another 25% said unsure. So that's a majority. It's 53% of Democrats say, might have been better off if they'd kill that guy. 28% said definitely, 25% said maybe so. That's freaking crazy. So tell me how you read this. There has never been as polarizing a figure. Even the first black president, Barack Obama, was never as polarizing. George Bush wasn't as polarizing as this guy, at least to my knowledge anyway. So how do you read where we are a couple of months away from election day?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. When former President Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, I'll never forget that his campaign manager, and her name escapes me now. Anyway, the female campaign manager who now does a lot of shows, she had an event where I was out, and she told me what President Trump doesn't understand in 2016, candidate Trump, Kelly O'Connor.
You mean Kelly
Conway.
Conway, thank you.
Kellyanne. What she said was, what candidate Trump doesn't understand is people don't like him as much as they hate Hillary Clinton. And he's probably going to win because of the dislike for Hillary Clinton. Well, now we're in 2024.
I see where you're going.
And people dislike Trump. I'm not sure as much as Hillary. I don't know what those numbers would
Yeah.
be, but he definitely is disliked. And I think the biggest problem he has right now is his dislike factor, not his policy factor, not his what he's accomplished factor. Those are all good qualities. His dislike factor. And I think that dislike factor is that doesn't give anybody the right to take a gun and shoot him. That's ridiculous. When I don't even know why 25% of it would say that. Because if you really want to get rid of him, you vote him out. You vote against him. I mean, that's the bullet. It's the vote. You just vote him out.
Well, the crazy thing to me, though, Jim, is that you don't have to wonder what he's going to do because he's already done it. This isn't his first run. He ran and won. And for 4 years, again, we can go into all the metrics and look, was your life better for those 4 years than they are now? And the answer has to be, yeah. I mean, literally, from my savings to my wages to my mortgage rates to my grocery bills, energy costs, all of yeah, it was way better. Who cares whether you like the guy or not? What his likability factor is? Did he bring authoritarianism to the United States? Did he do any of the things, the Hitlerian things that people threatened that he would, that they're doing now? He didn't. So it's like, he had 4 years to do all of the things you were afraid that he was going to do, and he didn't do them. Kamala Harris, who's been side by side with Joe Biden, has had 3.5 years to fix all of the things that they say were broken and hasn't fixed anything, and in fact made things far worse. So what the hell does it matter whether you like the guy or not? Who's doing the job that you're hiring him to do, right?
Yeah, well, so you're right. The problem is, like, people elect, especially presidential candidates, they got to be likable. And that doesn't mean they have to be, look, Barack Obama had no experience but got elected because of the likability factor.
The historic factor played a role too, though.
Some of that, yes.
Because Joe Biden himself said it. What was he? He wasn't Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson was inarticulate. Jesse Jackson wasn't clean, according to Joe Biden's words. Joe Biden's words, remember? Yeah. Here comes this guy. He's like the first real clean, mainstream, articulate black guy to run for president. I mean, he's like a dream, man. One of Joe Biden's many racist statements that he made. So there was, there was that historic factor here. Here comes a black guy that even white America would be, really, really comfortable with, because listen to how articulate he is. I mean, that's the mentality that they had for him.
But he was likable. People would say, and Bill Clinton, another one, he was a likable guy.
Oh my God, I voted for him in 1992. Right out of college, because he played the saxophone on Arsenio.
I was going to tell you, he played the saxophone, and people liked him.
I did. I was totally non-political at that point in my life. I didn't pay much attention. I was raised a Democrat by mom and dad, or not raised a Democrat, but I just registered as one because they were Union Democrat folk. Right. And but I'm a Democrat, and there's our guy playing the sax on Arsenio, and all right, that's cool with me. I mean, I didn't pay a rip of attention to it.
Well, and by the way, most people look at I was a Democrat my whole life too, until Reagan. And by the way, I went and saw the Reagan movie. I just wish we had more Reaganists. Even though Reagan had some issues, which a lot of people forget, he at least realized he was an American people likable president.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And I think that's what people are looking for.
Well, he had that affability, that so quick with the turn of phrase, that persona of or personality of his was just amazing. And Trump's just, I don't know if you ever see him smile unless there's like a cheesy smile, because most of it is the gruff, almost perpetual mugshot look on his face. It's like, I'm here to do a job. They're out to get you and I'm in the way. And that's his persona. It's very non-Reagan-like. But he got results.
Yeah. But see, and look, I've told him, even in the debate that he had with Kamala Harris, all he had to do was pivot away. Just pivot. Don't take her bait. Just pivot away and say, look, whatever she has to say, she's got the history. Right. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do.
And what I've done.
Instead, he took the bait and he started, the line that just drove me nuts was when he said, she's with the stupidest guy in the world as president and she's just as stupid. Why say that? Just say, listen, you can see what they're doing. Let's just talk about what I've done and what I'm going to do. Would have been great.
The part that I've done is the one that really gets me. It's like, if I've got a list that I've got by my computer when I'm on the radio, and I just always refer to the metrics. And I look at what inflation rates were, individual elements of the inflation rates, what gas costs were, what mortgage rates were, what real wages were, and on so on. And you compare one administration to the next, Trump to Biden, and Harris now owns Biden's for whatever that's worth. It's not even close. If he just focuses and fixates on that, and also border number of people coming across, you mentioned that earlier, I think he'd be fine. So,
but see, by the way, Harris can deflect away from that. Look, I mean, we have that in the state of Ohio. John Eustace trying to deflect away from Governor DeWine. He's running for governor. He's trying to deflect and say, well, that was a governor. That was Governor DeWine. That wasn't me. All right, well, Harris is going to do the same thing. She's going to deflect from...
Well, except that she can't, because she continues to say, I'm the last person in the room. I am always there with him when the big decisions are made. Therefore, you own them as well. And secondly, if you remember the platform, the policy platform, which wasn't released until the day before the debate, she had been the nominee unofficially or officially for about 50 some days. And the day before the debate, they released a platform, and come to find out, they copied and pasted Biden's entire platform with Kamala's name on it. So yes, you better believe she can't run from that record. And that's what Trump ought to be doing.
But they will. And even in the governor's race, lieutenant governor will. That's why lieutenant governors normally never get elected governors, because they normally are stuck with the governor's history.
Yeah.
And vice presidents should normally be stuck, but they're going to run from it. And she's going to run from it. She's going to say, look, in the end, I don't make those policies.
Trump's going to win Ohio. He won it by 8 points twice, and I think the latest number I saw was it was around 10 even. So, and of course, there's all kinds of questions about what kind of coattails are going to be in the state, down ballot, and so on and so forth. But he's going to win Ohio, so he probably doesn't need you to campaign for him. I don't know if he's going to come to Springfield or not, like they're talking about, or if he's going to come here to rally for Bernie Moreno. But when he comes here, will you campaign for him and be with him?
Oh yeah, and I still support him. But I would tell you this:
Are you MAGA? Would you call yourself MAGA?
Well, I think I'm a conservative MAGA. I believe in a lot of the principles that President Trump believed in, and I want him to get to those same principles. But I really believe I'm a Reagan conservative more than anything. And but I was just talking to somebody. He's probably not coming here. He's probably going to win. Although I don't, polling is interesting because nobody really wants to answer a poll anymore. But I'm a member. I'm part of a large organization, 501c4, and we're doing AI polling in all these states, and we are seeing we're seeing something different than what the polls are showing. We're actually seeing Trump winning Ohio, but not by that high of a margin.
Okay.
And you got to remember, there's some things happening in Ohio. We got issue 1. Issue 1 is going to bring out anti-Trumpers. Let's be honest. That's going to come out, and they're going to come out, and maybe they never voted before, but they're going to come out. We're going to vote for issue 1, and oh, by the way, we're going to vote against Trump. So I think that's going to hurt him.
And against Moreno, and against virtually everybody else.
And it's one of the reasons why I think Moreno needs that coattail from Trump, because there are, I was just with some Republicans. I hate to say this, that say I like Sherrod Brown, and I go, why? He doesn't represent Ohio. And they said, he's just a nice guy. See, it gets back to the old nice guy theory. Here's another one. I was at dinner up in Cleveland a month ago. 3 businessmen. They said to me, hey, who's going to win that Sherrod Brown race? And I go, well, why do you ask? They go, well, who's running against him? And I go, who's running against him? I said, you're a business guy and a Republican, and you don't know who's running against him? No.
That's problematic.
And that's problematic too. So the reason I bring that up, Sherrod Brown's been around for 50 years. Name ID is extremely important. Nobody has more name ID than President Trump. He's got a tremendous amount of name ID. But Bernie Moreno does not have the same amount of name ID. So if you go back to 2018, I lost by 6 points. We did a exit poll after. I won majority of Republicans. Sherrod Brown got the majority of Democrats. But only 40% of independents, which makes up 60% of the vote in Ohio, knew who Jim Renacci was, 4 days after the election. That's the uphill battle Bernie.
And you had 8 years in Congress.
I had 8 years in Congress.
And this is Bernie's first run for anything.
Right. So that's going to be his uphill battle. People don't know who he is. Now, he's getting some TV. People are getting to know him. But he's also getting some negative TV. And Sherrod Brown's is probably, the one thing about Sherrod Brown, he is the ultimate retail campaigner. And you're probably going to see him really start to put some ads out, the anti-Marino ads.
Well, he's been doing that since the primary in March. He's been anti-Marino, and it's funny is because, and I want to get off of this a little bit, but when you don't have a lot of a record to run on, you run on trashing your opponent. And despite 50 years in public office, 24 years or 18 so far, right? In the Senate, he doesn't have anything because he voted 99% of the time with the left, either the Obama or Biden or whatever. And that's not popular in the state of Ohio. That's not popular at all in a quote unquote red state, maybe not a conservative state, like you said, but a moderate right state like this. And so he's got to convince everybody he's not a radical. He's not with them. So he can't run on his record. So he has to run on, hey, the other guy's a bad guy because of A, B, C, D, or E. I want to move on to the post-Trump American, Republican and American world, because since he came down that escalator in 2015, it has been Trump's party. It was Trump's party when he won in 2016 and ran the country, and it was Trump's party in 2020 when things happened the way that they did, and he's, of course, back again. So there's MAGA, and then there's Republicans. And that's the reason I asked you if you consider yourself MAGA. When Trump's time is done, win or lose, it's either done on November 6th or it's done 4 years after that. What happens to this party? Does it go back to the Romney, uber moderate, almost left of center type of republicanism, or is the MAGA movement that Trump built, the true conservative movement, here to stay? Will it outlast him?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. One of the people, when people see me, somebody saw me this morning and said, "Hey, what are you doing in the future?" I go, "Listen, I'm not doing anything until after November 5th." I said, because the world changes after November 5th. We are either a Trump MAGA populist party,
right,
or we're trying to figure ourselves out. Because I do believe
that's a gentle euphemism.
Yeah. And that's the problem, because the party is, here's what's so interesting. Our country is divided, no doubt about it. It is 50-50. We have red states, we have blue states. We are a 50-50 country. And the presidential race is going to be very close. No matter what anybody says, it's going to be very close. Probably going to take even an extra day or so to finalize it. But we're also a divided Republican Party, because we, President Trump is not going to get 20% of the Republican vote. I mean, if you look at every poll out there, 20% of Republicans are not voting for him. Now, are they voting? I don't know. They may just not vote at all. But he's only getting 80%. One of the biggest problems he has today is that Kamala Harris is now up to like 96% of the Democrats are with her. You gotta have your base. And Trump's only at about 82%. So he doesn't have all his base, which means then the independents really come in. So the answer to the party is, all right, so they got that 20%. What are we going to do? I think we got to take the best, if he does lose. I think we got to take the best of the MAGA movement, the best of the conservative movement, and come together. That's what I want to do if he loses. Now, if he wins, I want to help him move forward, but I want to get him back. I want to pull him back a little bit conservative, and I think we do that through the states, because he's got to start looking at this national debt. We got to start talking about it, and he's not. And if there's one thing that, if he wins, and I hope he does, I got to get him back to where we're talking about the debt and the deficit and what's going on, and there's some tough decisions.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt about that. When I said it was a general euphemism, if he loses, we're figuring out where we are. If he loses, I mean, let me ask you. I mean, we're talking about a woman who was raised and trained as a Marxist, communist, by not only her parents, but by Willie Brown and those who got her into the political circles from the very, very beginning. She picked a running mate who is an avowed Chinese communist-loving Maoist who went to China 30 times by his own count, and according to students who went with him, bought up as many Little Red books as he could find and gave them out as gifts here in the United States. People don't know what the Little Red Book from Mao during the Chinese Cultural Revolution is. They need to look that up, seriously. we're talking about two people who believe in abortion on demand and maybe even after birth, which we found out in Tim Walz, Minnesota happens. We're talking about the full-on war on fossil fuels that was started under Biden is going to be put on steroids with EV mandates and fracking bans and drilling leases not being renewed and all of these kinds of things. We're talking about the worst of inflation, the things we've had. We're talking about free speech out the window. At least this is my opinion, Jim, because of what Tim Walz has said. Free speech is not absolute. You shouldn't be allowed to give out hate speech or misinformation online. And by the way, we'll decide what's real and what's misinformation, what's information and what's not. Kamala Harris has said, Hillary Clinton has said there should be criminal deterrence for those kinds of things, lock people up. I'm seeing an absolute catastrophe, not just we'll have to figure it out. I feel like it's all going to go bad, and it's going to go bad quickly if they win.
So here's my sports analogy to that. Sometimes the best sports teams have to lose so bad that they figure out a way to come back and win. And if we lose, we're going to have to figure out what happened and how we come back and win. Now, the safeguard in our country is I don't believe anybody gets anything done down there. I mean, we make, and it gets back to how I started and why I left Washington. If you don't have 60 votes in the Senate, you're not passing anything. And if you don't have
Kamala said when she was running for president in 2019, she is 100% for abolishing the legislative filibuster, so they don't need 60 votes.
Well, if they abolish it, but I do think we're going to control the Senate. I mean, I think the worst case, we pick up West Virginia, now we're at 50, and we pick up Montana, we're at 51. We are going to have 51 senators. Now, you can call me after election night and tell me, hey, that didn't happen, but I do believe it's going to happen. We're going to have 51 senators. I think we're probably going to have 52. There's some other states that are going to come in.
That's the only fail-safe is if that happens.
Yeah.
Because if they control the Senate, even by a tiebreaker vote with Tim Walz, and even if we have the House, we're still going to be very, very hamstrung.
Right. But if we have the Senate for sure, and I think we're going to have the House, she's not going to get very much done. She's going to do executive orders. We're going to overturn them. We can do a lot more. But I tell you, if she has the House, the Senate, and the presidency, then she can do reconciliation. She could change. That's what we did. That's the only reason. That's the only way Trump got the tax cut and jobs bill. We did reconciliation, which is another stupid thing in Washington, which you do it through the budget process, and you only need 51%, and it can only be budgetary items. But that's the danger. So I do believe our safety is by making sure we control the majority of the Senate and hopefully the majority of the House. And one of the things Jim Renacci is doing nationally through Jefferson Rising is we are doing everything to make sure we have a majority Senate and a majority House. Because with that, Kamala's not going to be able to get anything done if she wins. Now, again, I still think it's a coin toss.
So we've got just a few minutes left here, and I want to do something fun that I literally just thought of. Because I had like 10 more questions that we didn't get to because it's the way it goes. So when I do them in rapid fire by way of word association, I'm just going to give you a word and you tell me the first thing that comes into your head. Don't ponder it. Okay?
Right.
J.D. Vance.
Vice President.
Okay, give me the second thing that comes into your mind.
U.S. Senator.
You like him?
I think J.D. I like J.D. I do like J.D. I'm not sure if he's prepared to be president yet, but I do like J.D.
Joe Blystone. You didn't expect that one, did you?
Spoiler, and a fraud.
Joe Biden.
Nice guy turned sour.
Turn sour?
Yeah, because
did they flip him that way, or was he always that way? And he took getting the reins of power to have his true colors come out.
He went radically left, and that was never the Joe Biden that I knew even when I was in Washington. He was a moderate. Yeah, he turned sour to become president, in my opinion. To become president.
I think that's fair. He always had that. That was his ambition was never in doubt. Everybody knew exactly how many times did he run before he actually, was gifted the presidency in 2020. Anyway, Mike DeWine.
Nice guy, moderate Republican.
Border wall.
Needs to be completed.
Think it will be?
I think
because Trump. I think Trump hurt himself in 2016 when he said we're going to have it and Mexico's going to pay for it. That because everybody kept saying, well, we don't have to write it, we don't have to, appropriate any money for it because he said Mexico's going to pay for it, and there are different ways to make that happen. But nonetheless, he needs to just say we're going to build a wall and it's going to come out of the budget because it needs to be. And for crying out loud, how much is it costing us per year to have the amount of illegal immigrants who are in this country? The border wall is a tiny fraction of what that would cost. So let's build it.
So the answer there is the president really doesn't have the authority to build it. Congress does. We got to quit blaming or giving the president credit. We got to get Congress to approve it, pay for it. I mean, what President Trump was doing was using the CRs and the money and shifting it to pay for the wall. House and Senate should be approving it. We should get it done.
I would totally agree with that. Okay, just a couple more. COVID.
Bad thing that we got snookered on and took us in a long direction, including causing former President Trump to lose.
On the same track, medical freedom.
Well, see, I'm a big believer in not only medical freedom, but that everybody has an individual right. So whether it's property rights, individual rights, if you don't want a jab, you shouldn't have to take it. And if you do, God bless you. That's your right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is a right. Wokeness.
Crazy term that the wokeness in society is a liberal idea that just needs to be removed. We just need to get back to basics.
Public schools.
Essential, but not 100% necessary. I know that's a odd answer, but
give me a few more words on that then. What do you mean by that?
Well, look, we do need to have options. And I think private schools and other options make public schools better. But there are people who can't afford public options and other options, so that the public schools will have to be there. But I think the competition needs to be there so public schools get better. And if somebody doesn't want to go to a public school, they should have a voucher and be able to go to any private school they want to go to.
Okay. Mainstream media.
What's interesting about mainstream media is I think they're all lost. I mean, I think Fox goes too far one way. I think MSNBC goes too far the other way. I think CNN's all over the board. I think the only way you really understand the media is you got to watch every show and try and pull them all together, because everybody says something different about the same topic.
See, I don't see those as being mainstream media. Those are cable news. When I think of the mainstream media, I'm thinking about the ones that everybody gets because it's part of free TV. I'm talking about NBC, CBS, ABC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the things that everybody gets.
Yeah,
cable news is one story.
I don't even watch them anymore. I do not watch. I mean, if it wasn't for streaming, I probably wouldn't be watching. And sports, I probably wouldn't watching TV. It's funny. I think what you mentioned before we started, I don't watch local news. I don't watch because I don't believe anything they say anymore because they give their opinions, not the facts.
I was just about to ask you. We were talking about that before we started and turned the cameras on. We were talking about local news. We're in Northeast Ohio, for those who don't know. You don't watch local news at all?
No. If I watch local news, it'll be to see what the weather's going to be, and it'll be what happened, with the Browns or the Cavs or the Guardians, who I call the Indians. And it'll be for that, and it'll usually be Channel 3 just because I like Russ, the anchor there at 11 o'clock in news at night. But that's it, and it's not because I want to see the news. It's because I want to see I want to confirm the weather, or I want to see what people are talking about with the sports teams.
I gave up woke sports because sports went woke, and I've been a sports guy my entire life. The first half of my broadcast career was all doing sports. So we'll close on that one. Cavaliers, Indians, Browns, which is the first one to win a title? Cavs won one in 2016, Indians not since 48, Browns since 64. So which is the next one to win a title?
I think it'll be I think the Guardians have the best chance. They're a good team. They're put together well. I think the Browns have made some major mistakes with their quarterback and sold the store on that, and now they've got to live with it. And the Cavaliers, I think, are in a building mode. I mean, they just need. Let's face it. Some of the best NBA players don't want to come to Cleveland. and that's a
They
problem.
re-signed one of the best, though. Donovan Mitchell
He
is
did.
one of the best. I was surprised.
I would agree with
actually.
that.
Yeah,
I would
which
agree
is
with
good.
that.
So real last one now, and we'll stay on the sports thing just because it's fun to kill it with this. But give me the GOAT in each of those three sports. Jim Renacci's GOAT in the NBA, basketball history.
Well, mine's in basketball. It's always Michael Jordan, and I got to see him. I mean, and what I loved about him was, it was all about winning, and he wasn't afraid to get the ball, even in the toughest times.
Demanded it, in fact.
Right.
But also knew exactly when Jim Paxson is out there and Steve Kerr is out there to hit the game winner. He always knew how to do that too.
Yeah.
And it's a huge debate, of course. There's still a strong contingent of LeBron fans who want to say he was better than Jordan. I think those people are smoking crack. Not Browns, GOAT in football.
It's got to be Brady. I mean, and I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I used to love Terry Bradshaw in his day, and there are a lot of great quarterbacks out there. Elway is a personal friend of mine, but when it comes down to no matter what his age is, no matter what team you put him on, he can win. It's Tom Brady.
Elway's a personal friend.
Elway's a personal.
How'd that come about?
When I was part of the Arena Football League, he was one of the owners, and I was one of the owners.
Oh, okay. Well, I might have to call it a favor. I need John Elway on Strictly Speaking, so we'll have to see if you
Yeah,
can.
I don't know, in Cleveland, I got booed when I went and was talking to him at a Hall of Fame dinner. People said, "What are you doing with him?"
All he did was his job, man. He did his job, and he
Right.
did it exceptionally well, that drive, for crying out loud. And then, what did I leave out? Baseball. Who's the greatest baseball player of all time?
Well, and because I grew up in Pittsburgh and because I saw him play, it's always going to be Roberto Clemente to me.
Wow, strong answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people here are going to say Bob Feller. A lot of people
And I like Bob Feller,
generally
don't get me
will
wrong.
go to Ted Williams, and
Yeah.
then others say Willie Mays and Babe Ruth. Nobody says the steroid crew. Barry Bonds has the
No, you're
numbers that
right.
are insane. Nobody says the steroid crew, which I'm glad of. I agree with that.
I still remember
Clemente's a good
Clemente taking a ball off the wall and throwing a guy out at home.
I remember that. I wasn't old enough, but it's a historical thing that I
Right.
remember. Yeah, that's a good answer. I liked it. Well, this was fun. I appreciate you coming on and
No, I'm
coming
glad
in.
to be here. We'll have to do
Thanks
it
very
again,
much.
and we'll have to see if some of the things I said after November 6th occur.
We will do that.
It's going to be an interesting next 50 days.
Yeah.
Whatever's left.
Yeah. Interesting is an understatement, but not nearly as interesting as the 4 years after that are going to be. Either lame duck Donald Trump, where he gets to do the things that he says he's going to do, or the first term of Harris Walls, which to me scares the out of me. So yeah, it's those days that I'm more worried about than the next 50. But Jim Renacci, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it as well.
All right, that'll do it for Strictly Speaking. Make sure that you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the follow button or the subscribe button, depending on whether you're watching this on YouTube or on Rumble or listening on Spotify. And make sure you hit that alert button as well so that you know the next time we drop new content right here on True Blue. Thanks for watching. See you next time.